To play with toy soldiers, you need to collect them. You need to become a collector, because if you don't collect toy soldiers, then you won't have anything to play with. Although toy soldiers are mostly a game, of course, I played with my father, as well as Rurik Borisovich. I always played with my father at home. In summer, when we had the chance, when some of our family went to the dacha, we could use the large dining table. I played with my father at toy soldiers for a day or two. Then my son grew up, I played with him. Now my grandchild is growing up. He's 13. This is a suitable age for playing at toy soldiers, and now I play with him. Georgy Vilenbachov has real masterpieces of Nuremberg tin miniatures in his collection from the period of its heyday. For example, there's a composition of a few dozen figures, Pancake Week in St. Petersburg, manufactured by the Heinrichsen firm. And this is a series of figures that are 6 centimeters high, which the Russian Emperor Nicholas I commissioned from the German craftsman. The monarch sent drawings that were made at the general headquarters showing the uniform of all the Russian regiments. The Nuremberg flat miniatures as a genre of art have both aesthetic and historical value, as a document. This is the extraordinary function of what seems at first glance to be a simple toy. This invention, since they're tin and soldiers, made the educational element very important. Heinrichsen began to make figures. The Nuremberg craftsmen in general began to make figures, and to be precise, their name in German was Kulturgeschichten sind Figuren. Cultural, historical tin soldiers. And they began to make soldiers that portrayed previous eras. So there were soldiers such as ancient Egyptians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, knights, lance knights, and contemporary soldiers. And this was very important. They made figures and reacted very quickly to events that took place. The Crimean War began, and figures appeared that portrayed French, English, Russian, and Turkish soldiers. This was all very important because boys would hear the latest news, and now they would have a chance to play out this news on the table. Factories for the manufacture of tin soldiers in Nuremberg and other European cities, highly qualified professionals were employed, artists, engravers and founders who created figures of incredible beauty and elegance. Even when three-dimensional soldiers made of cheaper materials began to appear everywhere in the 20th century, flat miniatures still remained in demand. It was with good reason that the Danish writer of fairy tales called his character the stalwart tin soldier. The charm of flat figures is that these are figures for playing with. And they combine two things that are very important. Since they're flat figures, there is this convention. They are flat like game counters. And so on this table, without creating a three-dimensional terrain, without using any real objects, you can start playing. A three-dimensional figure requires three-dimensional terrain and many things that aren't needed for a flat figure. But at the same time, a flat figure doesn't make it possible to realize this educational function in full, to depict the uniforms and the weapons precisely. Special attention is given to painting the soldiers. Factories only used to manufacture soldiers that were painted because they were toys, and above all, they were supposed to be bright and look good. Today, especially for collectors, factories also make unpainted figures so that the work of the engraver can be properly appreciated, which is usually lost under the layer of paint. Some collectors prefer to paint the soldiers themselves. There's a grading system for figures in the world. They're divided into average painting, above average, luxury, extra, and their very highest artistic skill. It's called decorative painting. Not just painting, it's close to art. This is the luxury painting, extra painting. It's usually used for dioramas. After they're put in the diorama, they'll be given additional painting. depending on where the light will come from, where the light will fall. Light and shade effects will be applied to them. But it's inside the diorama that the effect of the picture is created. Naturally, every artist, when they start to make their first figures and paint them, starts from a very low level, unless they have wide experience beforehand. When I took out the matches and painted my first figures with matches, brushes, say size 2 brushes, couldn't be bought anywhere. There was a terrible deficit. And I used matches to apply color with oil paints. These are the first figures I painted with oil paints when I was 14 years old. That was my first attempt. Factory sets of toy soldiers differed by weight. The label didn't show the number of soldiers in the set, but their weight in fractions of a pound, according to the European tradition. For example, in a box that weighed 1/8 of a pound, about 50 grams, there were 12 soldiers. Sets were compiled according to the personnel in the unit. There had to be an officer, standard bearer, trumpeter, and 9 soldiers. In a children's game, this set could be equivalent to a regiment, which in real armies contained about 2,500 people. Flat tin soldiers gradually transformed from being a popular children's toy to a cultural and historical artifact. When you see the little figures of soldiers from the past, you're amazed at the mastery of the artist who painted the figure and the exquisite work of the engraver who prepared the mold for casting. This is perhaps the most important stage in making tin soldiers. Traditionally, engravers use slate, a dense rock that is 500 to 600 million years old. Initially, the shape of the figure is marked out on the polished surface, and then the required shape is gradually carved with a chisel. But the engraver has certain limitations. The thickness of the figure should not exceed 1.5 millimeters. This is an aesthetic feature of the Nuremberg flat tin miniature. We know that Hans Christian Andersen had a small collection of toy soldiers. Which one he chose as the hero of his fairy tale is something that Vladimir Nujdin may know. The Petersburg artist received an interesting order several years ago. One collector, Gilles Buchholz, found a first edition of Hans Christian Andersen, the first edition in his lifetime, which was published with engravings. And the first stalwart tin soldiers were shown on these engravings. They really were flat, on a rectangular base. It was even painted the colour of the Danish army, and it was a grenadier, if I'm not mistaken. And we realised from these pictures that it was flat and small, because there are various toys scattered around it, which gave us an approximate idea of its size. That was interesting. Everything fell into place. We knew what the soldier looked like and how Europe saw it. The fact that this set was made from an old tin spoon and that the soldiers were lacking one leg seems to show that it was homemade. This is a common error in casting in home conditions into a poorly made or outlined mould. At a major factory with a recognised name, all of the sets were strictly examined and the defective copies were removed. Perhaps the soldier in the fairy tale was made by a father for his son's birthday. This is a tin tablespoon from the second half of the 19th century. It's probably the sort of spoon that the set of 25 toy soldiers were made from in Andersen's famous fairy tale. Let's see if it's possible to do the same thing in the 21st century. Maestro. Thank you. Tin is a metal with a low melting point, and the spoon dissolves in the melting pot before our eyes. At factories, soldiers are not usually made from pure tin, and additional components are usually added to it to increase the fluidity of the melted metal and the firmness of the finished figure. Casting, for all its seeming simplicity, is a very responsible and important process. It's hard to guess how the metal in the mould will behave. The mould for casting consists of 2 parts, and on each of them the sides of the future toy soldier engraved. So that the contours of the figure fit precisely together, there are locks on the moulds. There are spikes on one side and holes in the other. The metal is poured into the mold through a canal, which is bent according to the laws of physics. The melted metal, as it moves along the narrowing canal, creates the necessary pressure to push the air out of the mold through special small air vents. A precise calculation of the volumes of the entry canal and the air vents affects how well the figure is cast. After getting detailed instructions from Vladimir Nujdin, I have decided to try to cast a toy soldier myself. Legs wider, to save your shoes.
Так.
Right.
Затем.
Go on then. Then I hold the mold.
Форму держать. Это уже
That's right. It's a real art. Like a crab, that's right.
так.
Take it off with the stick. Take the film off carefully. And above the rocks. Good.
Ну, попал.
All good, all clean.
Назад сливаем.
Pour it back.
Вот так.
Like that. Yes, that's right. Lower your arm. So put it in.
Теперь
Now turn it towards yourself, the upper part of the mold. Towards yourself first. Don't pull it down. Just pull it from this side. Towards myself. Yes. Now open it. What have we got then? Congratulations on your first stalwart tin soldier. It was easier to cast the other 24 soldiers. Now they just need to be painted. Red uniforms, blue colours. Anderson didn't write that on the uniform of the Danish Grenadiers there was thin white piping along the edge of the collar, which was very hard to paint. And the buttons, taking the scale into account, ended up being the size of saucers. But generally, it's a very fascinating activity. Acrylic paints dry quite quickly. In just 5.5 hours, the toy soldiers are ready. Thanks to these tin soldiers, the Illyria of Rurik Popov came into being. They made Georgy Vilenbachov take an interest in history and heraldry, and inspired Vladimir Nujdin and Andrei Arseniev to create works of art of exceptional beauty. The stalwart tin soldier has brought together thousands of children and adults all over the world, collectors, artists and engravers. This is what the toy soldiers from Anderson's fairy tale look like. One tin spoon really was enough for this set of 25 soldiers. So that the soldier was just like the one in the fairy tale, we cast him with a leg missing. For this was the character who immortalized himself and his comrades, the tin soldiers.